It is good to be back in Taper Town. Cheers, y'all. How's it going? We are just a week and a half out at this point from the Delaware Marathon, my big spring marathon goal race that I have been training for the last few months. Hopefully you've been following along with all the training updates, but if you haven't and you don't already, I hope you'll go ahead and click that subscribe button and give the video a thumbs up to help other folks find it as well. But since I've been updating on my training throughout the process of getting ready for this race, I just wanted to check in one last time with kind of one last training update as far as how my progress has been going for this race, as well as some updates on pacing plan, what my taper is going to look like, etc., how I am feeling for this race, a lot of those last minute details as we get ready to drive down to Delaware and prepare for that race. But really quickly, before we jump into the race specific update, I did want to give an update on another major goal that I've been working towards. If you saw my goals for 2022, you may remember that one of my major goals was that I had been sort of trailing off in terms of my training consistency, my overall mileage, etc. And one of my major goals for this year was to reestablish a strong base, particularly because I really want to start dedicating more time to marathon running, really focus on improving that PR. And I know a big part of that is the base mileage that your body is able to handle. So working on just reestablishing a solid and consistent foundation from which to train for future races. That's kind of what I've been working on a lot with my coach throughout this Delaware Marathon training plan. And I have been very, very excited with the results so far. Obviously, a huge shout out to my coach, Diego, who's been helping put together my training plan, keeping me on track as well. But I'm just very, very excited that mentally myself, I have been able to make it out on the majority of my runs, apart from a few illnesses, missed runs, things like that. But for the most part, back into a solid training routine and logging consistent mileage again. It feels so good. Looking at my training journal really quick, love to see these numbers, but this is just a chart of my weekly mileage. If we were to look at my log from last year, it was a lot of just up, down, up, down, up, down, a lot of 0 weeks, a lot of very low mileage weeks, staying very, very consistent apart from a few outliers. Obviously, we have the David Goggins challenge, this big bump, some recovery weeks logged in there as well. But overall, staying much more consistent. And I think an even better illustration or representation of that, if we jump onto the computer real quick, I know I've mentioned Smash Run before. I love the website just because of the visual graphics that they give you to show some of your long-term running stats over time. One of my favorite ones to look at, if you remember, is the trailing 365-day mileage, basically your total mileage over the last 365 consecutive days. And if we look at my chart, again, I brought this up in my 2022 goals, my peak mileage was right before I ran my Bandera Ultra Marathon, the Bandera 100K in January of 2020. So we can see that big peak right at the start of 2020, where I had been on a very, very consistent increase, solid training since about 2017, really ramping up 2019 into 2020. And then after that, as I mentioned earlier, that just sort of steady decline with a couple peaks here and there, but really letting my consistency in training fall off. And I just cannot emphasize enough how essential consistency is in training, particularly if you're looking to get faster, looking to build speed. You need consistent mileage. You need your legs to adapt to the stress and the pressure of consistent mileage and higher mileage runs. You can't build on that mileage unless you have that consistent foundation to work from. Major goal of this year, reestablish that consistent foundation so that during future marathon training blocks, I can ramp my mileage up even higher week to week because I'm already adapted to a kind of standard base level. But as we can see, 2022 so far, those numbers have turned around and are slowly creeping back up, or actually kind of rapidly creeping back up, which I am very, very excited about. Obviously, I still have a long way to go to get to that 2020 number, but feeling really good and not trying to rush it. This is a marathon, not a sprint. This is about longevity in running, longevity in my training. So I just have to continue with the consistency, continue logging that miles. But as of right now, in a really, really good place with training, feeling great about my mileage so far, and very much looking forward to this Delaware Marathon. So with all of that being said, let's get into some of the training specifics for the Delaware Marathon. Just to quickly recap sort of the last 2 weeks of training before the taper. Those were sort of my peak weeks. Obviously, if you saw my last video, I'll link to it up above as well if you want to check it out. But doing some course preview of the Delaware Marathon course, I was able to get down to Delaware and do my long run, my longest run on the course itself, 22 miles total. Left that run feeling very, very comfortable. And then the final week was a lot of recovery runs during the week to allow myself to sort of recover from that long 22-mile effort, but then back-to-back long runs on Saturday and Sunday this past weekend. So it was a 30-minute recovery run on Wednesday, 50-minute recovery run on Thursday, and then two-hour runs over the weekend at an endurance pace. So on Saturday, I ran 12.73 miles, and then on Sunday, pushed the pace a little bit harder. Again, 2 hours at that endurance pace, but finished 13.52 miles. Sunday was especially difficult just because I finished the run on Saturday and went into, I just did a long run, I want to recover, ate some food that I probably shouldn't have, had a couple of recovery beers as well, was eating more to recover from Saturday's run as opposed to prepare for Sunday's run, and I certainly paid for that on Sunday. Just woke up feeling not great, just dehydrated and heavy. I went out for my run. The first half just could not drink enough water, felt incredibly dehydrated, added some fuel, added some electrolytes for the second half of that run, but the whole second half, then it was my stomach just hating me for the choices that I had made the night before. And there were many, many times during the second half of that run where I said, you know what, I've put in the miles. If I quit now, it's not gonna make or break my marathon. I can just stop, but kept pushing, and in my brain was focusing on, no, this run isn't gonna make a huge physical difference for my performance at the marathon, but mentally, this is great preparation for the end of the marathon when I am just struggling. I wanna slow down, I wanna walk, forcing myself to finish and just focusing on the things I can control, my pace, my form, my mental state, etc. So that's really what I focused on that Sunday run. It was brutal, but I was able to finish the full 2-hour endurance run. Total mileage for that week was 33.87 miles. That caps off training for the marathon, and now we are just in maintenance and recovery mode, also known as the taper, over the next 2 weeks or now week and a half leading up to that marathon on April 24th. So as far as taper is concerned, it's just a few kind of 30 to 45 minute recovery runs spaced out, usually a Tuesday and a Thursday run. I think I have one 45 to 60 minute endurance run next Tuesday, but just very, very easy mileage. Again, just maintenance and recovery being the focus. And then I'll have one more long run, just a single 2-hour endurance run this Saturday. That'll be my last long effort. And then next week especially, we'll be focused on just recovery, fueling, lots of carbs, lots of hydration, etc. Just making sure my body is as well rested and recovered and ready, primed to run the Delaware Marathon. And that brings me to sort of the last piece of this video, which is, what is my strategy for the Delaware Marathon? What is my final plan? And I will be completely honest with you, this is an active conversation that I am having with myself on a day-to-day basis, several times a day, going back and forth in my head. What do I want to shoot for? This will only be my 4th official road marathon. And again, I said this when I was running New York City in the fall, I just don't have a ton of experience with the marathon, not a lot of comfort with how to properly pace a marathon to know how my body responds. I have a general idea of how I've performed. I know that all of the marathons I've run, the wheels have started to come off around the 22-mile mark, so that's something that I'm trying to prepare for. The other big unknown here is that the first quarter of the race, especially miles like 3 to 7 in particular, are just kind of this long, gradual uphill that I showcased on that course preview just a couple weeks ago. But my main concern here is wanting to kind of start conservatively, especially getting through those first 7 miles, taking advantage of the downhill since the first half is an out and back, taking advantage of the downhill on the way back, and then maintaining a strong, consistent base for the second half of that race, and just seeing how much of a PR I can snag. So in terms of specific numbers, my race in New York City, that was 3 hours and 44 minutes and 45 seconds. That's an 8-minute, 35-second mile pace throughout the whole race. I do think I will have an easier time. I think Delaware is gonna be an easier course, only because, yes, I think the elevation is somewhat comparable, but you're getting all of the elevation out of the way early in Delaware, as opposed to at New York City when you hit some significant kind of just rolling hills at the tail end, and that is really what like ruined my legs at the end of the race and mentally was just so debilitating. So although I think the elevation will certainly take a toll on me during this race, I am hopeful that my legs will be able to maintain better at the end because it's just completely flat throughout the second half of the race. So that's something that I'm thinking about right now in the back of my head. The other thing to consider as well is I do think I am in much better shape for this race as opposed to New York City. Looking at consistency alone, I've put in a lot more mileage preparing for this race, not necessarily any specific speed work or anything like that, but I do think that is certainly a variable to consider, that consistency-wise, I have been much more on in the training for this race. So those are sort of the variables that I'm using to determine what the race strategy is gonna be. So as I'm going into this race, the main question I'm asking is, how big of a goal do I wanna set for myself? And I think also how risky of a goal do I wanna set for myself? I've never put myself in a position where like, either I'm gonna get this goal or I'm gonna blow up and completely fall apart, if that makes sense. And that's sort of where I'm torn right now. There's some numbers I'm throwing around in my head, and I'm just not 100% sure what is a confident goal and what's a, I could try for this, but it could also blow up in my face. And specifically, kind of the range that I'm looking at is somewhere between the 330, 335 mark. So the higher end of that, 335, that'd be shaving about 10 minutes off of my current PR. That will be a huge accomplishment. And part of me thinks that this is well within my grasp. I don't wanna, again, make the mistake of setting too confident of a goal and then blow up. But if I'm shooting for like a 335, that's about an 8:10, 8:15 pace, closer to 8:10. And I do think I feel comfortable with that. I feel like maybe I can maintain that. Again, the elevation is gonna be sort of the unknown going into this race, but I feel like that's more what I'm leaning towards. The other one is if I wanna get even more aggressive and shoot for 330, and that I think is really the goal where it feels like maybe it could be doable, but that's the one where I feel like if it's gonna go wrong, I'm gonna fall apart. Like, yes, I can certainly maintain those paces towards the beginning, but if it's not something that I can maintain throughout, I am going to die at the 22-mile marker, somewhere in that range. So those are the numbers that I'm tossing around in my head. I'm leaning more towards that 335 mark. We will see 10 minutes off the marathon in, what is it? November, December, January, February, March, April. So 6 months, shaving 10 minutes off the marathon does seem like a pretty lofty goal. But like I said, I think the easier course combined with just being a lot more prepared for this race, I think it's doable. And it's just gonna be how prepared am I come race day. So it is time to take advantage of the taper, recover, rest, do a lot of mental math, probably go back and forth at least a dozen times daily on what my goal is gonna be for the race. But I am feeling very good for this race. I'm feeling very excited. I can't overstate how thrilled I am to be running this race in Delaware through my hometown. The course is gonna be a lot of fun, getting to kind of pregame for the race at a lot of my favorite restaurants, but then most importantly, getting to celebrate after the race at some of my favorite beer spots, beer gardens, breweries, etc. It is just gonna be such an incredible weekend. Happy that my family will be there as well, and just looking forward to an incredible race. So I know we are coming up on the race very quickly. If you do want to register last minute, I'll drop the discount code down below to save 10% on your registration. That's for the full marathon, half marathon, any of the other distances that they have, but just cannot wait to arrive at the starting line. So I hope the races that you're training for are going very well. I hope you are as excited for your spring goals as I am for this race, but just looking forward to finishing out the taper strong and arriving on that starting line as ready as I can be to shoot for, hopefully, let's just go ahead and say this 3:35 goal, but we'll see how it goes. But until then, thank you as always for sticking around, for tuning into the training. I hope it helps inform some of the decisions that you are making in your training as well. And until next time, I will see you around. Cheers, y'all.